today and the structural issues underlying it. History teaches us that moments of crisis represent extraordinary opportunities, either for consolidation of power or for transformation. Never before has it been so critical to get the architecture of global food governance right. So what can we do to get the governance we need to radically transform our food systems around the world? Here are just a few suggestions. Defending the human rights framework and strengthening the agency of rights holders, strategically regulating the power of corporate and financial actors, subjecting multilateral governance spaces to a hefty dose of democratization, and building convergence with the inclusive CFS at the center. The EU and the European Parliament can make important contributions to attaining this objective, as we will hear in the coming panels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nora, also for keeping your time, which is very important because that leaves also time for others to speak and for discussion. It shows really that tension or conflict between the need for democratic multilateral governance with corporate dominant multi-stakeholder governance is at the heart of the discussion now, today. And we'll hear from Paula Goetz that this also happens in the context of the latest UN Food Systems Summit. Paula is a peasant farmer in a community farm in Germany and member of the German peasant organization ABL. She's a member of the coordinating committee of the European coordination La Via Campesina, and since October also member of the coordinating committee of the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism for the Committee on World Food Security. Paula has been one of the social movement leaders facilitating the People's Autonomous Response to the UN Food Systems Summit. Paula, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Thierry. Thank you, Nora, for this introduction. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, so I'll try to highlight a bit how was the process towards the Food Systems Summit and how the civil society and the social movements have been confronting this. First of all, as Thierry already highlighted in the beginning, there is no doubt that there is an urgent need for a global conversation towards the ongoing multiple crises, which began back 2007, 2008, and have never ended, and where hunger and the different forms of malnutrition have been increasing, and where now with the COVID-19 pandemic, they have been even reinforced, and the pandemic has also exposed, how the current corporate food system has failed, to address hunger, inequalities, and the whole ecological environmental crisis we are facing. So the Food Systems Summit came, raised a bit before the COVID-19 pandemic, but already in this multiple crisis context. And the official aims of the summit were very valuable, I would say, to achieve the 2030 agenda, to address the current challenges of climate change, to make food systems more inclusive, and to support the sustainable peace. And of course, all this recognizing the planetary boundaries of our common earth. Now, the problems start when we look to the genesis of the process. As Nora already shortly said, the summit was born from a partnership agreement between the World Economic Forum, which is actually an organization bringing together the most powerful corporations in the world, and the same ones who are largely responsible for biodiversity degradation, for the rise of inequalities and food insecurity in the world. So the same actors are the ones initiating the summit together with the United Nations Secretary General. And although several times, the issue of conflict of interests have been raised by the civil society, they have never been truly addressed by the summit organizers. Then when we look to the process, first of all, because it is the result of this partnership agreement, it's not actually the result of an intergovernmental decision or process, this summit. So it doesn't build on the legacy of the past. The previous World Food Summits, they were a clear multilateral decisions of states. This was not the case now. Also, as Nora already mentioned, the summit has been undermining the role and the mandate of the Committee on World Food Security and this multi-actors, inclusive, multilateralist approach. There was also, from the beginning, a big push for the creation instead of a new space of multi-stakeholderism, and the whole structure and also the process towards the summit were opaque and were non-inclusive. For example, the IPC, the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, which is the broadest platform of social movements working on food and agriculture issues, has never been involved. And the principle with that, the principle of autonomy and self-organization of social movements and of the organized civil society has been fully bypassed. Instead, the summit organizers have been handpicked prominent individuals to be part of the summit bodies, and with that, trying to transmit an illusion of inclusivity throughout the process. And we have to say that all this has been strongly supported by the EU and by certain EU member states. The European Council, for example, published a declaration supporting the summit. So how have the social movements and the organized civil society been expressing their concerns, and how have they been mobilizing to stand against that? First of all, the IPC, this large platform I already mentioned before, raised from the beginning, when this partnership agreement between the United Nations and the World Economic Forum was signed, the IPC raised strong concerns about it. And this declaration has been also endorsed by several other or hundreds of other civil society organizations. Throughout these 2 years of process in the run-up to the summit, we as organized civil society have been demanding the protection and the promotion of human rights, which was quite weak throughout the summit. We have also been demanding that any conversation about food needs to also include the current impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic to food security, what has been ignored as well. So we also denounced the marginalization of those most affected by food insecurity from the process. We also denounced the way that the summit was undermining spaces like the Committee on World Food Security with its multilateral and rights-based approach, by introducing the multi-stakeholder governance model. And we didn't only denounce, we also tried several times to establish dialogues with summit organizers. But although we did this, no truly change took place in the structure or in the process, so that we didn't see any other option rather than stand away of this in order not to participate or to legitimate illegitimate space. And the final declaration prepared by this large coalition of civil society organizations, the People's Autonomous Response, has been supported by over 1,000 civil society organizations worldwide, and you can find it under this link. So what are the main takeaways? The summit created a big fragmentation between member states' positions. The outcomes, they are not the result of political consensus, and they are also not negotiated outcomes. there was an exacerbation of power asymmetries within food systems. The most powerful ones gained more power, and the ones who are actually in the center and should be the agents of change, they have been much more marginalized. And there was also a reordering of the political relations. And here there is a series of new spaces that have been created. I cannot go through them in detail right now. Yeah, and right now we are in the summit's aftermath, where we are seeing new structures being created, although they ever claimed that no new structures would be established, but we are seeing that a big push for anchoring the Food System Summit into the Rome-based agencies. Very concrete, there is the creation of a new structure, again, without intergovernmental decision, the coordination hub, which is being hosted by the FAO, with staff coming from other United Nations agencies, and which will be providing technical assistance to countries and also liaising with the United Nations agencies on Food System Summit follow-up issues. And finally, there is also the new scientific group being set, which is clearly also a new structure to replace the HLPE by industry-friendly scientists. And here again, we see a strong support by the European Union on all these new structures being set. So to conclude, I would say there was a big push towards multi-stakeholder governance of the food systems, and with that also the increasing of the corporate influence within the United Nations systems, the so-called game-changing solutions from the summit, they are all high-tech solutions and are not touching or tackling the root causes of the crisis. As I said, the ones most affected by food insecurity, they didn't get a place on the table, and their human rights have been undermined. And finally, all these major changes that are taking place in the food governance sphere, they are taking place without formal decision by the United Nations member states, and unfortunately with strong support of the EU. So I hope these elements can help us to understand what's going on, and that we can together today find ways forward to change this situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. It was very clear. What I take also out of it is that basically the Food System Summit didn't even respond to the elementary democratic governance rules and standards. Also, and despite this, the Food System Summit has an impact on the current and future food governance, global food governance in the world. And the second aspect are these power asymmetries that were very critical in the Food System Summit, and where the EU plays an important role. EU actors, member states did play an important role, and they're probably also part of that power relation trying to control the food systems governance. Thank you for that, Paula. We'll now have a short video message from Michael Fakhri, who is the Special Rapporteur on the right to food. So he couldn't be with us because he lives in Oregon, so he's still asleep now, but he wanted to join and send this message that you will hear in a minute. Thank you.
My name is Michael Fakhri, and I am the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food. Thank you for inviting me to this event today, but unfortunately, to the significant time difference, I'm unable to speak to you live. As a UN Special Rapporteur, I'm an independent expert that regularly reports to the UN Human Rights Council and the UN General Assembly. It is my job to be the eyes and ears for the UN system and address questions of hunger, famine, and malnutrition from a human rights perspective. My work in part draws from my regular conversations with governments, international organizations, other experts, businesses, and civil society. The question posed at this event is one of the most important questions today. Who is governing our food systems? The issue of governance raises the question of how ideas should be put into policy and operationalized through institutions. It also raises the question of who should be making the decisions and where should those decisions be debated and ultimately decided. Food is addressed in a number of international organizations, but to date there remains no coordinated multilateral response to the pandemic. It's like food is addressed everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I believe that how people, businesses, and governments respond to the current food crisis, this will be what transforms our food systems for the future. The challenge is that we have to figure out both what to do and how to do it at the same time. Too often people focus on developing a technical or policy solution, but don't work out questions of governance at the front end. If you run a good idea through bad institutions, you end up with bad outcomes. The UN Food Systems Summit did not address the issue of governance in a substantive way, despite dozens of people raising the issue. After the UN Food Systems Summit, there was the creation of the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub. To date, no one knows exactly what the hub is going to do and how it relates to the Committee on World Food Security, the CFS. In general, here is how I see the way forward. First, the Food Systems Summit biggest mistake is that it marginalized human rights and excluded a large number of social movements representing millions of people from all over the world. Any way forward should ensure that human rights is at the heart of operations. This is what people on the ground want. What human rights means is that the people who got us into this mess today should be held accountable for their actions, and that the people who are the most essential in a food system, small producers, workers, women, are given as much power and control as possible. Second, the way change happens is by creating new relationships. The way change happens is not by coming up with the most clever idea. It comes from developing new relationships with people. Imagine a network of people within different international organizations and amongst national governments regularly coming together in a strategic way to focus on the questions raised in this event and on COVID-19 and the food crisis. This could be transformative. Third, we all have to somehow work through the fact that multilateral governance is not serving people who need the most help. Right now, there is no multilateral coordinated response to the food crisis triggered by the pandemic, as I've said earlier. Look at the mess around the issue of vaccines. Vaccines are simple compared to food systems. We know what we need to do to end the pandemic, and yet the world didn't manage to ensure that everyone has access to free vaccines as quickly as possible. What this tells me is that global governance is not working. I'll conclude with what I'm doing from my end. The General Assembly has asked me to lead a series of consultations and present a report to them in 6 months on the food crisis. Part of what I have to do is frame what is the problem and provide some way forward. I found people at high levels at the International Labor Organization, the World Health Organization, and the Office of the Commissioner of Human Rights ready to collaborate with each other. There is a coalition of member states and civil society organizations working together through the CFS. I regularly engage with the World Trade Organization, and I'm keeping an eye on how things are going on there. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, known as UNCTAD, has new leadership, and I'm curious as to how things are developing over there. And a lot of people are working to get food on the agenda at the next climate change conference in Cairo. Let us keep finding opportunities to develop a coordinated response to the food crisis triggered by the pandemic from a human rights perspective. We are in a moment where if we are not all working together to take on the current food crisis in real time, then we are wasting precious time. I wish you all the best at this event.
Thank you, Michael. It's important also to underline that from a human rights perspective, and with the need for developing a coordinated response to the food crisis, also we need to improve multilateralism. So this is kind of the introductory part, and we'll move to the second part of our event, which is the panel, the first panel. We have the honor to have different members, and all women actually in the first panel, MEPs from different groups, but also from different committees of the parliament, which allows us also to have different perspectives at this panel. I would like to welcome Maria Noichl, who is a German member of the European Parliament for the SD. She's a member of the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, as well as on the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality, where she's coordinating for the SD group. Maria has also been one of the strongest advocates in the debates for a stronger policy coherence for development for the new Common Agricultural Policy. We also welcome Beata Kempa, who is MEP from Poland for the ECR group, where she coordinates the work of the group in the Committee on Development. Important also to highlight is that Beata is also currently the rapporteur of the own initiative report of the Parliament on addressing food security in developing countries, actually being debated now. Beata has a long-standing political experience at national level, where she also served, among others, as minister responsible for coordinating Polish humanitarian aid. The third panelist is Saskia Bricmont. She's Belgian from the Greens, elected in 2019. We also warmly welcome her because she will bring an additional perspective to this debate, because she's indeed member of the Trade Committee and also member of the Civil Liberties and Justice Committee, where her priority in both committees has always been one to respect human rights principles and democratic governance. Lastly, we welcome Sofia Monsalve Suarez, who is Secretary General of FIAN International. FIAN is an international human rights organization working for the right to food and nutrition. Before turning Secretary General in 2016, she coordinated FIAN's program on land and natural resources, where she did a lot of fact-finding missions as well, working closely with grassroots food producers organization. And she has long-standing experience in advocacy on issues of food governance. So welcome all of you. We do have basically two questions, and one is, how can we defend and promote a democratic multilateral food governance grounded in human rights? Who needs to be at the table and on what conditions? First question. And the second is, which spaces need to be strengthened at global levels to ensure policy coherence and governance accountability for transition towards sustainable food systems that puts people and planet at the center? Maria and then others, you have 5 minutes to answer these questions. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for all the speech before. It was very interesting, and it is always good to have to find a meeting and to find a group to fight for the same way. I'm in the Agriculture Committee, but I don't like to speak like a people out of the Agriculture Committee. I think the Agriculture Committee is always on one side, and I think I'm a MEP, and I'm not on one side. I think I'm on the side of the people. And this is important for me. And I would say, what is my answer for the first question? The answer is we have to make clear that the focus must be the human rights. The human rights have different rights. The right to water on the one side, the right to live without hunger, the right to seeds on the other side, the right to equal, gender equal, and so on, the rights to have a home, the rights to have a healthy environment. The human rights are so difficult, and it is absolutely important to say that the idea for a sustainable way of food, the idea for a sustainable way for the whole world must be in the focus the human rights. And I think nearby the human rights, in the same time, the basic is the democracy and is the peace. We see it everywhere. There is a lack of peace or there is a lack of democracy. It is very, very difficult to bring these rights to every man, to every woman, to every children. And I think it is very important to say the democracy on the one side, the human rights on the other side are the most important points we have to fight for. Yes, this is only, I would say, overview, but it's for me the most important point. And the rights is not only a right on the paper. We have sometimes the situation, for example, land, the right for land or the right for water. This is a right on the paper, but it's not a right in reality. We need a clear position from the European Parliament or from other groups. The right must exist in reality. It must be for women and men, for children to go to the law and say there is against my right, and there must be a sanction system, and not only to have the shoulders and say, okay, what's going on. This is, I think, one of the most important things. We have to be educator for fight for the rights. We have to be educator for fight for democracy, for peace. And we have to make clear the system who one person can live in a good way, but they do it of cost from the other person. This is not the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Beata, can I invite you also to make your comments?
Bardzo dziękuję. Przede wszystkim dziękuję za zaproszenie na to wydarzenie.
To this event. For me personally, it is a huge honor, but also the subject of today's discussion is very topical and should be at the center of the discussions in the European institutions and world institutions. And thank you very much for warm words from the chair. Pandemic of COVID-19 has shown the weaknesses and the inequalities, threatens the lives of people who are most fragile, and the poverty is the main reason for these problems. That's why, in my view, we should go to the roots of the problem through eliminating poverty and eliminating the differences in income. Similarly to other areas, we do not have enough measures, enough funds, and the gaps are there appearing, which require intelligent and systematic approach. The question of food security requires not only larger financing, but the appropriate direction and political actions in a decisive manner. So in order to support and ensure the food, affordable food, we need social policy to eliminate the inequalities in society which then exacerbate the problems. That's why we should encourage the local communities to act in this area. The youth, local producers of food should be prioritized. And in all those actions against malnutrition, we should strengthen the coordination locally and strengthen locals. This is what we can do the quickest. What is very important is the work of the agencies of the European Union and the FAO organization in Rome and World Food Programme, especially the preventative actions, which are the key to alleviate the crisis and save people from hunger. With regards to the second question, I would point out to the actions in order to support those systems that should be aligned, measured accordingly to a given country, because there are many differences, and there we need to pay attention. European Union should invest into partnership with the development countries, which are supplying diversified, well-priced and nutritious food, because investing in food and nutrition is key in building human capital and sustainable development. Especially this policy should be carried out towards children, because this is the future. And I'm just about to finish. The European Union should take this priority in the health, education, water, sanitary conditions, and hygiene. So there we need to talk about integration of this policy and with the other policies of health and environment. I've got other elements, and I've got it in my report, which you were so kind to remind us about. I will just add one aspect here. In that report, we need to look at the food wastage. This is another point which is a very serious one in our discussion. Thank you ever so much, and I greet you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beata, for your intervention. Saskia, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais pour ma part
profiter de la présence. As there is interpretation, I will speak French. Thank you for inviting me to this exchange on a very topical issue, and I totally share the point of view of the UN rapporteur, Mr. Fakhri, who said that the pandemic highlighted something, and that starvation is not the result of a lack of food, but of political choices that limitate the access to adequate food. So indeed, we should approach the root causes of this situation, as it was said earlier, and poverty is also a symptom of many other issues, and the roots are some individual interests that create all these problems, and we should attack these private interests, individual interests, and put into place mechanisms that make it possible for people to access complaint mechanism. And the European Parliament can do that, of course, because we are at the core of the political discussions, and we should put at this core the common interests, especially when it comes to food sovereignty and multilateralism, keeping in mind, of course, the basic foundation of the International Convention of Human Rights and also of the EU Treaty, where such objectives as a fair trade is guaranteed, also the protection of human rights. And at our level, there's also an issue of coherence, of political coherence. For instance, the common commitment of the European Commission and Parliament to serve and to achieve the Sustainable Development Objectives. But yet we see that the policies are not in place to do that. And this also applies to the agricultural policy and social policy. I'm also in the Commission on International Trade, and I would like to focus on what we can do at that level. We know that, and happily enough, 40% of the trade flows have a positive impact on the achievement of sustainable development, meaning that 60% of these flows have a negative impact on the Sustainable Development Objective. How can we redress this? By working on collective legislation, on the corporate social responsibility. Also, the Commission should produce some proposals which are postponed and postponed. We hope that the Commission is going to produce those proposals, because we realize that own initiative reports are not enough to change the situation. And when you look at the food sector, which is one central sector for us today, we know that it's accountable for 1/4 of the greenhouse effect emissions. And we also know that there is a tendency to increase the food production, and this is also to the detriment of the earth, the loss of diversity, and more pollution, which of course has as an impact on the climate crisis and hence on the population of the world and their access. Am I through with my time? Yes, okay. I know 5 minutes is very short. That's a pity, but I will close by saying that this should be approached at European level and at worldwide level. Of course, the European Parliament does not have a direct impact on the multilateral World Trade Organization negotiations, and we don't have a direct impact on the conference, but yet we have a responsibility to propose other policies and to make sure that the Sustainable Development Objectives be mainstreamed in those objectives. Thank you. Thank you. So sorry for cutting you short. Time is flying by.
Parole suffisant. Merci beaucoup en tout cas pour cette autre perspective très complémentaire d'ailleurs. J'invite Sofia pour la dernière intervention. Sofia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Thierry, and good afternoon to all participants. Since time is too short, I will go very straight to the point, and I think it is very important that the European Parliament and the European Union, if they are serious about a global governance on food, which is based on human rights, it is very important that they address the enormous asymmetries of power and the corporate concentration in food systems. I think Nora and Paula elaborated on that in detail. And it was just amazing to see that the Food System Summit really refused to tackle the issue. And I think this issue is really, really urgent because the impunity, the corporate impunity, if you take environmental destruction, climate destruction, human rights violations, displacement, land grabbing, agrotoxics, I could go on and on, labor rights, exploitation of workers. So it's really a serious issue, and we need to address it in different places. It's not just in the global governance of food, it's also an issue about taxes, tax justice. It is just unbelievable that these corporations don't pay taxes, and that don't pay the proper taxes, that we have a system of financial flows where tax havens are really an important part, and so on and so forth. So it is also a trade issue because the trade system privileges global supply chains. And so we have in several parts of the system a privilege to corporations, and they have gotten such a privileged position that we think that they are essential. They want us to think that they are essential for food provision, and they are actually not. because we know, as Nora referred to, that it is small scale food producers, peasants, indigenous peoples, family farmers, the one who are actually feeding the world. So it's very important to tackle this. And we have sometimes the impression that the European Union is rather promoting an agenda of corporations. And I think the attempts in the Green Deal to change that, to, for instance, stop the use of agrotoxics, stop exporting prohibited agrotoxics in the European Union to other countries, it's very important, and I think we have to tackle this. My second remark is on the development of the human rights, the international human rights framework. I think it is very important that the European Union and its member states really seriously join the negotiations on the treaty, binding treaty on transnational corporations and human rights. The European Union so far has a lot of hesitation and is not doing this and prefer to focus only on due diligence and other things. But if we are serious about a multilateral system, it is very important to join the international discussions and the international system and to agree on rules in these fora, because otherwise one gets the impression that powerful countries pick and choose what they like best. And I think this is not really genuine and faithful to really a belief in human rights and the democratic principles. Same, I could say that for the governance of the food, for the global governance of food, I think the ILO conventions, the declarations on the rights of indigenous peoples and the declaration on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas, as well as the CEDAW convention, I would say that these four instruments should be the core. But we see the European Union objecting to the declaration on the rights of peasants because they did not vote in favor of that in the General Assembly of the United Nations. Well, this is a multilaterally adopted declaration. And I think the European Union should respect that status and rather foster discussions in the European Union. How could we move to move the countries of the European Union to accept and ratify that declaration, which is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will not go for a second round in terms of answers, but maybe I would invite the panelists of the first panel maybe also to respond to that critical question of power concentration, asymmetries of power and the corporate power there, which is part of, it's one of the questions of the second panel. So please also, I will give you also the floor for those who want to respond to that question. So you also have maybe some time at the end of the second panel to intervene if you wish to. So I would like to start with the second panel, which again is a very interesting panel. And we have also the pleasure to have Leonard Mizzi with us, who is from DG INPA, International Partnerships, and he has come in on very short notice because we have invited the Commissioner on Agriculture and the Commissioner of Santé, but unfortunately due to agendas they couldn't participate despite their interest for the topic, and Leonard has kindly replaced them. So Leonard is working, as I said, for INPA as Chief of Unit of Rural Development, Food Security and Nutrition. Before, he has also a long-standing experience at DG Agri, where he was responsible for agricultural trade and development, and also leading the interinstitutional unit. So also the relations with the Parliament, Council, but also between the directorates, and also steering the civil society dialogue group. So thank you for joining. The second participant is Claude Gruffat, who recently joined the European Parliament after Brexit. So welcome. I don't know if I could welcome you to the European Parliament. That's maybe a bit too, that's not my role. But again, here he's participating in another committee, which is also important. It's the Economic Affairs Committee, and he's also substituting the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee. So this is also, again, another perspective in our discussion. And he's part of a family of farmers, and he's really pushing also for a change in the agricultural system for a better and more sustainable food system for health, planet, and also for producers. Anja Hazekamp is, and I forgot, Claude Gruffat is also from the Greens. Anja Hazekamp is from the group of GUE. She's vice chair of the Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, and also member of the Committee on Fisheries and member of the Agri Committee. She has been a member at the European Parliament since 2014 from the Dutch Party for the Animals, and was one of the initiators of this special committee on pesticides. And in 2019, she initiated the inquiry committee on animal transport. So, and she is since 2 years now also appointed as the ENVI rapporteur on the EU Farm to Fork strategy. So also very thankful for being with us. And lastly, we also have a farmer's perspective from Eastern Europe. Atilla Szocs is a young peasant farmer from central Transylvania in Romania, growing and processing traditional varieties of fruits and vegetables, and is also the president of Ruralis, which is a national association of agroecological peasant farmers with almost now 17,000 members. Is also a member of the coordinating committee of the European coordination of Via Campesina. So welcome to all. We had 3 questions that were submitted to you, and they are quite fast. So, but I will briefly mention them. One is related to that question of corporate power concentration. So how to address that and how to avoid the capture of democratic institutions for public food governance is one question. The second relates to the European Green Deal and the different strategies that have been developed in the Green Deal. So the question is what EU policies, mechanisms, and means should be leveraged to strengthen democratic and rights-based governance of food systems on the basis of that holistic approach that the EU is ambitioning with the European Green Deal. And also related to that is how to increase the EU leadership responsibility also and the EU coherence by connecting different domains for a better holistic governance approach to transform food systems. I would like to invite first Leonard to briefly, in 5 minutes, try to respond to these difficult questions.
Thank you, Thierry. And first of all, thanks a lot to the organizers, because trying to reply to those 3 highly political questions in 5 minutes, I think it will be like a record. I always try to attend meetings, not just to hear my intervention, but also to hear the others, because I think, first of all, events like this are important sounding platforms. I also heard what Michael Fakhri said, who is the UN rapporteur. So I also heard a bit of EU bashing, and it's not a problem for me to be constructive criticism. But what we are trying to do in the EU is also to show leadership. Leadership not only around the EU Green Deal, the issue of due diligence was mentioned. So we come up with a proposal soon. We came with a proposal on deforestation-free value chains. If it's not going to be the EU to show leadership, I don't know who's going to show leadership in today's world, in this geopolitical world. And Thierry, I just need to tell you and the Parliament and all the participants that in a month's time, so in a week's time, we will have the EU-Africa Summit. where there we will show leadership in a number of areas, but I will not divulge details, vaccines being mentioned one, but there will also be issues around food systems. Let's take stock on the EU-Africa Summit when the time comes in a few weeks' time. But in a month's time, we will have Foreign Affairs Council development component where the topics you are mentioning will be a priority also of the French presidency. Multilateralism as part of the communication, the interface between climate, biodiversity, food systems, and governance, because as you know, we are leading also on the vision of FAO, lots of critiques which are well grounded on the FAO coordination hub. And I saw EU supports this, EU supports this. EU supports where there is a need to support. We supported the UN Food Systems Summit approach, but we questioned where it needs to be questioned. And we are questioning the coordination hub. There is no blank check on the coordination hub. We are in contact with Stefanos and grilling Stefanos, who is the head of the hub. As you know, this is a transition period between what happened last year and exiting of Kalibata and the new team. We want a one UN approach, meaning that's not only Rome, but Rome plus. The big challenge in this area, Thierry, is the intersectoriality. This is not vaccines, production of vaccines. This is intersectoriality at its best, which it is a challenging, I would say, miracle to find the silver bullet of governance when you have to deal with power asymmetry. That means competition policy. You will not have competition policy at global level because you have global value chains which are positioning themselves, issues of taxation, transfer pricing, trade policy, land governance, water, humanitarian development, peace nexus, issues around seeds, biodiversity, genetics. How are you going to have a governance structure which brings all these players together? It's like bringing the Commission services, the Parliament committees together in one big jamboree to have coordination. So this is a big challenge in terms of policy coherence. So policy coherence for development, this is also our role. And this is also a role of the Parliament to hold accountability on policy coherence. Because I remember, I don't know, for example, whether there is a rapporteur on policy coherence. In the good old days there were, I don't know whether there is a policy coherence rapporteur. And this is important because when we do the EU Green Deal, biodiversity strategy, farm to fork strategy, what we are trying to show is leadership, but also it's important to link the internal policies with the external dimension and hold accountability of all this. And this is also our role as DG INTPA to check that accountability. I think also bashing the EU on leadership is fine, but we are also trying to show leadership. For example, on agroecology. This is the first time where, with the French presidency and some like-minded EU member states, we are going to build up a big portfolio on agroecology within the CGIAR, which is the consultative group at the highest level on research in terms of seeds, in terms of agroforestry, in terms of rolling out the EU Green Deal at its best in terms of what we want to do in the Sahel, in parts of Africa. This is one. Continue supporting the CFS. If it's not us, it will not be anyone else to support the CFS. And we are in design stage to see how the CFS can be a key interface with the hub, supporting Gabriel Ferrero and his team, and hopefully Gabriel will also be in Montpellier in a month's time. And also, most importantly, is to have this institutional debate with the Parliament, which we have with Beata and her team, but also to put food security and food systems at the core of the European agenda. Is this automatic in today's world? No, it's not automatic. Food systems is probably number 3, 4, 5 on the agenda. It's not 1 on the agenda. So let us continue working on food systems, but let us also have this intersectoriality. And yes, the EU will show leadership, will continue showing leadership, not only in Rome, Geneva, New York, with all your support and all Your welcome comments and interventions are more than welcome, and we will certainly continue engaging with you, Thierry, and the team. Over.
Thank you very much, Leonard, for these inputs and yes, answers. Claude Gruffat, est-ce que je peux vous donner la parole pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît?
Oui, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Alors moi déjà, pour compléter ma présentation, juste dire que j'ai passé 35 ans à m'occuper d'un réseau de distribution alimentaire bio. Et ça m'a apporté une expérience importante sur ce qu'on peut imaginer comme nouveau système, parce que je l'ai expérimenté et fait la preuve quelque part que ça fonctionne. Et la gouvernance des systèmes est importante. J'étais dans un système coopératif, c'est Biocop en France. Hein. Alors, sur la question, moi, je voudrais juste revenir sur ce qu'ont apporté les multinationales et où on en est en termes de dégâts aujourd'hui, et c'est quoi le schéma alimentaire qui nous attend. Ça fait 70 ans en Europe que l'agriculture industrielle a pris un certain chemin et a produit un certain nombre de choses. Notamment la première, c'est que cette agriculture ne nourrit pas le monde, puisqu'on a toujours 850 millions de malnutris et 2,5 milliards de sous-alimentés dans le monde, et ça ne change pas avec le temps. Dire que sur cette période, on a inventé la monoculture céréalière avec l'épuisement des sols, rapport de l'ONU de 2019 qui signifie à quel point la fertilité des sols a été dégradée, la pression parasitaire qui fait qu'on utilise de plus en plus de chimie et donc on empoisonne de plus en plus l'environnement. Sur l'élevage, c'est la même chose sur le plan animal avec les mutilations animales et les souffrances dans trop peu d'espace. Sur la malbouffe de masse, etc., que ça a engendré. Je vais très vite parce que ça, je pense que vous le connaissez, mais juste redire que l'agriculture, dans son vocabulaire, dit bien les choses. Il y a 40 ans, on parlait de paysans, de cultivateurs. Ensuite, on a parlé d'exploitants agricoles. Dans les années 80, on a parlé d'agro-managers et aujourd'hui, on parle d'agro-moléculteurs. Donc, on dit bien où on va et comment on y va. De cette agriculture industrielle, demain, on nous promet quoi? On nous promet l'alimentation de laboratoire avec la viande artificielle et maintenant, on est parti dans le végétal sur le même plan. Je dis ça pour dire qu'il y a un choix à faire, que c'est aux citoyens de le faire et que la souveraineté alimentaire est pour moi un domaine de la sphère publique, que c'est un service public et que c'est donc aux politiques de s'en emparer et que ce n'est pas les grosses entreprises multinationales qui doivent piloter ça. Donc là, on a à reprendre notre rôle. Alors sur un plan européen, ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire que tout ce qui concerne le contrôle aux frontières pour l'alimentation et les matières premières alimentaires, on doit être responsable, on doit faire ce qui est à faire. Et la taxation qui va porter la différenciation, c'est un nouvel élément qui doit absolument être utilisé pour l'importation, pour l'exportation, dans le cadre des règles de l'OMC, voire évoluer, parce qu'elles doivent évoluer aussi, les règles de l'OMC. Pour ce qui concerne le modèle de commerce, il y a un outil qui existe, et ça, je l'ai pratiqué, c'est le commerce équitable. Et le commerce équitable dit beaucoup de choses sur l'évolution des modalités d'échange. On connaît bien le commerce équitable nord-sud, le commerce équitable nord-nord, c'est-à-dire rien que sur la sphère européenne de l'Union européenne, on a quelque chose à inventer autour de ça et à faire évoluer autour de ça, parce que ça dit plein de choses sur le modèle d'agriculture, le modèle d'alimentation, etc., bien sûr. Et sur tout ce qui concerne la transparence aux consommateurs, avec l'étiquetage et un étiquetage aux consommateurs qui non seulement parle de traçabilité, de qualité, d'origine, mais qui parle aussi avec Planet Score, qui est une méthode qui va aller un petit peu plus loin que ce qu'on connaît jusqu'à maintenant, pour travailler la partie responsabilité environnementale de la production d'alimentation. C'est-à-dire que ce n'est pas que le produit en lui-même, mais tout ce qui le concerne dans sa phase de production et d'élaboration qui doit être pris en compte aussi. Ça me paraît être des choses majeures pour avancer. Alors, dans la stratégie Farm to Fork, qu'est-ce qu'il y a d'important à dire? Qu'on est à un moment où on est en train de passer d'une politique de la production vers une politique de l'alimentation. Alors, je ne sais pas si je coupe là et puis on fait le reste dans les questions. Je vois que vous levez le doigt en disant que j'ai déjà consommé mon temps.
Terminez votre réflexion et puis alors on passera à la personne suivante.
Pour moi, ce qu'il faut maintenant, c'est qu'au niveau de l'Europe, on passe d'une commission agriculture à une commission alimentation et qu'on mette l'alimentation au centre des débats. C'est un sujet qui est tellement transverse en plus, c'est-à-dire qu'il concerne tellement de domaines d'activité qu'il faut le poser en tant que tel et qu'on doit faire cette évolution. Et moi, j'inciterai évidemment au Parlement qu'on aille dans ce sens-là et je pense qu'on est un certain nombre à voir les choses comme ça. Voilà, je vais conclure comme ça et puis on poursuivra le débat plus tard dans les questions. Merci.
Merci, désolé d'avoir...
Non, il n'y a pas de souci.
Oui. Anja Hazekamp, the floor is yours.
Sorry, Terry, you were mentioning me or Miss Anja?
No, it's I'm inviting Anja Hazekamp, but Anja, you're still muted.
Yes. Thank you so much, Thierry. I want to thank also the organizers for organizing this important event. Our food system is broken and the environment, the climate, biodiversity, humans and animals are paying a high price for this. And your questions give food for thought on how we can fix this. And let me start with the corporate power concentration. For decades now, our food system has been hijacked by corporate interests, and that has led to grave environmental, social, and health costs. This hijacking means that agro-businesses has determined how we spend the billions of the common agricultural policy. And this is resulting in the ongoing intensification of our agriculture. And as a result, our food system is now dominated by a handful of very big and powerful players like Bayer Monsanto, Dow DuPont, ChemChina Syngenta, BASF, you name it. And this conglomeration we see happening all over the food chain. And they have successfully avoided the necessary legislation by always opting for a public-private partnership. And we have to get rid of these urgently. It is high time that we set actually binding legislation to transform our food systems instead of relying on self-regulation. We need to change the way we spend the CAP budget to make it work with and for nature instead of against it. And we need to move away from intensification. Therefore, we need binding conditions. We need to make sure that more mergers in the food chain, which so threaten the food security for all of us, are stopped. And we can do that by, for instance, by requiring a sustainability assessment when mergers are announced. Most importantly, we need a common food policy instead of a common agricultural policy. With our Farm to Fork report, we've made some very strong calls in this respect, and we will keep a good eye on the Commission to make sure that they will deliver. And there are many EU policies, mechanisms, and budgets and to strengthen and democratize our food system. We need all of them to be leveraged. To start with the common agricultural and fisheries policies, which are about a third of the European budget. And these can provide a strong lever for positive transformation if we would only set the right conditions and targets. Secondly, we need to enable the consumers to make healthier and more sustainable choices. This means not only full transparency through labeling, this means also radically changing the agricultural promotion programs, because why on earth are we spending public money on promotion campaigns for meat and dairy, while we know that these are among the key drivers of climate change and biodiversity loss? It means also making sure that our kids are not exposed to unhealthy products by advertisements or every time they are waiting in line in the supermarket. And of course, it means making sure that the healthy and sustainable revolution towards a plant-based diet is not hindered in any way, for instance, by ridiculous proposals to ban names such as veggie burgers or soy milk. Thirdly, we need to ensure that the whole legislative framework from soils to air quality with food safety, consumer information, pesticide use, authorization of GMOs, etc., that they are all fit for future, which means a lot of work as we need much stricter limits, authorization procedures and enforcement. And
can I?
Yes, I'm coming to the last question, if you can allow me. To reform our food system to a sustainable one, we need coherence between all these policy domains. And we also pointed out in the Farm to Fork report that we need a holistic approach to our food system. And that means that we have to connect all the ambitions we have for health, equality, environmental protection to all policy areas, agricultural, fisheries, trade. I can mention some examples here, but I will maybe have the opportunity later. We need this holistic view to concrete actions to accomplish a real revolution on our plates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anja. And the last word for this panel is to Attila. Attila, please.
Thank you, Thierry. Well, I realize now I received a very difficult task because a lot of the answers have been given. So I find myself many times reiterating these answers. But I also would like to bring on some farmers' perspective and also from my my region. So we see, and from the discussion is clear that the dominant industrial food system is at the heart of the current ecological, social, and economic crisis. For decades, the strategy, both the national and the European and the global strategy to fight hunger, was based on this increasing productivity and technologies and chemical pesticides, fertilizers, high-tech seeds, and integrating on the international market. But it's fair to say, and I see it in my region, I see it in my village, it's no longer an effective approach because all these are a major contribution to climate change, biodiversity loss, and deforestation. I'm starting to live in an island as a village doing farming in an oasis of monoculture. And this is horrible. And this is what global governance enabled this, and a lot of EU policies enabled this historically. So we need to find ways to produce, and we need to modify the way we produce, we distribute, and we consume food. And for over a decade already, and we farmers and fishers and pastoralists and food workers, we have been demanding this holistic food transformation, which is rooted in food sovereignty and rooted in agroecology. So our vision is based on redesigning and diversifying and relocalizing farming systems. So we need to dismantle these economic assumptions. We need to involve the human rights to imply human rights, and we need to rebalance the power. So just to answer, we need a whole way, not the golden middle way. And we need EU leadership on delivering wholly, not just the golden middle way. It's very important. Very important also that to maintain the Committee for World Food Security as a central democratic space where we have these global discussions and we have this global debate, and to live upon the reports and recommendations of this committee, because there are a lot of, it seems that a lot of times that all these reports and recommendations are ending up in shelves, while it should end up in policy. It should end up in transformation of the food system. It's very important that within this United Nations Committee of Food Security, we identify it as the only place where governments and people are working to tackle this current food crisis. So very important to maintain these spaces. But now, when it's coming to the European question, because on an EU level, this translates also into a very sectorial approach, and it was mentioned by Mr. Mizzi. But through these different EU policy spaces on food and farming, the debate shifted to very technical discussions with stakeholders, farmers being considered as one of the stakeholders, but neglecting that farmers are right holders. So EU governance should generally align with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Peasants, it was already mentioned, but also with other treaties and conventions like the Plant Genetic Resources Treaty, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the 10-year guidelines. And this should be properly and holistically implemented in EU legislation, in EU law. So in this way, EU could really live up to this statement that we are hearing, that no one is being left behind, including the most affected people, mostly peasant farmers. So more precisely, if I go into analysis, there's a need to benchmark the CAP, and especially in the development of the national strategic plans through the spectrum of the farm to fork strategy, through the Green Deal, to reject them if they don't serve these very good tools. And we don't fall into techno fixes. So no carbon farming, no climate smart agriculture, AI controlled farming systems, gene editing, high-tech solutions, which are just fixes, which I understand that the EU gained leadership on promoting this golden middle way. But as I was saying, we need to go all the way to an agroecological transformation. So we need a more holistic approach where food is farmed and not carbon is farmed, and where soils are synced for humus, and they are not speculation interface for carbon credits, for instance. So these are all grassroots transformation that need to happen. The only way to just and sustainable way forward is to immediately halt and transform corporate globalized systems. We were talking about the due diligence and the next laws that are coming. This not should be a sham for CSR, not should be for greenwashing. We need to implement this, the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. We need to live up to these declarations. We need to involve them in our European policy. So the EU champions itself when it comes to human rights. It's time to put these human rights to action right here in EU. And with this critical rights-based orientation, public food policy and the governance must put peasants and other right holders at the center of governance and policy making. I'm almost finishing indeed. So governments and regional and international institutions must support these constituencies pathways for transforming the corporate food system through agroecology and food sovereignty. There is this CFS. Why not use the model on a European level? Why not create this democratic space of debate also inside Europe? So food sovereignty offers us this pathway, and we should take this pathway together. And thank you. I was very passionate because I heard all the speakers. So it really, I'm trying to answer many difficult questions that you put here, but very valid ones. So thank you.
Thank you very much for Attila and the other speakers of the panel. I would like, just as I said for the first panel speakers, if some of you want to very briefly react on that question of power concentration of the corporate sector and their corporate influence on policies, you could just raise your hand and then I can give you the floor in a minute. But what I see is that I see quite a lot of convergence in what people have said. And one of the very important points is that the centrality of human rights in the governance has been underlined. But at the same time, also the difficulty to implement it and also the work that still needs to be done at European level where lots of improvements can be taken. And at the same time, it's also part of the work that the EU is now dealing with the due diligence framework, but at the same time also its responsibility at global levels. And probably these binding regulations are critical also to address the issues that were raised, the challenges related to food governance and the role of corporate actors. And this is central also. How can we create binding rules to make sure that we engage in the food governance that gives the voice, that realizes human rights, gives voice to the right holders rather than those to those who have power. Another important element that was underlined is the intersectionality between very different policies, which is a challenge. And I don't think we have a clear answer to address that. There are certain proposals that were put forward in terms of a food and agriculture committee trying to link these together. So there are elements that are there, but this is certainly work that needs a lot of debate and reflection, and probably that needs to be developed with time. Another intersectionality, and I thank also Beata for underlining it, is to link the local and building also governance rooted in local realities, rather than to develop rules binding that are one fits for all responses, but trying also to respect also in a democratic way, trying also to engage with local communities and to adapt policies with national within the national context. I also see the importance, Claude also underlined it, the importance of a democratic debate. We are really at the crossroads of different models to respond to a broken food system. And this really needs, it's not a technocratic debate. It's not a debate between even ministries or government delegations at the CFS or World Trade Organizations. It's really a democratic debate where people need to be involved, because these democratic choices really impact on many elements of daily life, and food systems are at the center of social policy, climate policies, trade policies, etc. So food systems really needs to be addressed in that holistic way. And lastly, I want to underline the important role and responsibility of the EU. It's not just about EU bashing, but EU takes certain initiatives that moves the debate in a positive way forward, but at the same time, it's not enough. And the EU is also confronted with responsibilities, and probably also in many spaces defense also its economic interests. So much more needs to be done. So these are certain elements that I take from the discussion now. I don't know if Beata or I don't see Maria anymore, but if you want to address that specific question of corporate concentration, if so, just raise your hand. Otherwise, I will go to the questions and answers. We still have 15 minutes. Do you want to quickly respond, Maria or Beata, on no? Okay. So we do have a couple of questions. I saw some that could also be, and I will. There were no specific people that were. The questions were not addressed to specific people, but I would maybe start with one of the last ones. Is the participation of local communities whose rights, human rights, have been affected, impacted by, let's say, in this case, EU policies. How can they also influence the EU policies? How can they claim their rights if they're impacted negatively by EU policies? So that's mainly a question of policy coherence for development, but it's more looking at the mechanisms. There is another question related to the due diligence. What are we expecting from the due diligence proposal, the legislative proposal, and maybe having a critical assessment? Is that enough? What needs to be done more? I'm looking, maybe we can start with, yes, and there is also an additional question about gender inequality. I think Beata also underlined the important role of inequalities. How can we also address the increasing gender inequalities in food systems, and what needs to be done in terms of redressing this? Who would like to answer one of these questions?
Thierry, I'll try to be short. I'll give you a concrete example of what we are trying to do. This is under cocoa. So as you know, under the cocoa talks with Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and hopefully Cameroon, we are trying in a demand-driven agenda to tackle clearly deforestation-free value chains, living wages, living income, child labor in a systemic way. Now, this is not easy work. It is targeted, it's cocoa, 2/3 of the production goes to the EU. So it can be sort of controlled in a way which basically the EU has a big chunk of the market. This is not the case with coffee, for example, which is more fragmented. Now, imagine if we have to do this commodity by commodity besides the horizontal approach, this is not easy work. So having a multi-stakeholder approach, which ticks the boxes of human rights, which ticks the boxes of gender. And when I say ticks the boxes, it means also inclusive finance, because finance is part of the equation. We are trying to de-risk finance, but our financial institutions are struggling to de-risk because it's complicated to de-risk finance value chains, especially on small ticket sizes, meaning ticket sizes below 1 million. Because financial institutions like big funds of 5, 10, 15, 20 million. So that is a big challenge that we are confronting. And that helps also in terms of rebalancing the value chain. First of all, by supporting farmers' organizations, by building up cooperatives, by supporting women organizations. But this takes time. It takes organization work and it takes structures, because it's a question of also representation and smart policies. And then what is important is that accountability through the interparliamentary approaches, whether national or European Parliament. It's like a watchdog, and that is what we have discussed in the past, how to create a bit of a watchdog. We try to use through the Interparliamentary Alliance Against Hunger. We identify areas, and we need to start focusing, for example, on seed systems. What can be done? You know what EU is trying to do is raise standards at the highest level through a regulatory approach, because voluntary approaches don't work always. So trying to be regulatory. When we go to the international fora, one, we are pushed back by some of the big players. No problem, we know this, because increasing standards of social and environmental will squeeze a lot of people out of business. I'm not speaking small farm holders here, of vested interest. So this creates a bit of earthquakes in the system. And when we go to FAO, we are pushed back by, I don't need to mention, big players who don't want to play ball in the social and environmental standards. So that's why, again, it's not a question of EU bashing, but EU is showing leadership, and there are very few like-minded out there. So it's also important that we get relays from you to see what needs to be done better, so that we continue conveying the agenda which everyone is mentioning today.
Thank you. Claude, and then Beata and Anja.
Oui, merci Thierry. Alors, moi, mon regard, c'est que il faut qu'on arrête de truquer et de tricher. Aujourd'hui, l'agriculture industrielle est subventionnée et elle ne tient debout que parce qu'elle est subventionnée. Et c'est énorme, hein, le budget de la PAC au niveau européen, c'est le tiers du budget de l'Union, c'est extrêmement important. Et en plus, chaque pays en rajoute. Ça, c'est le premier point. Le deuxième point, c'est qu'on subventionne aussi les exportations. Ce qui veut dire que la souveraineté alimentaire des autres pays du monde est mise à mal, puisque nos exportations arrivent dans les pays du Sud et concurrencent l'agriculture locale. Ce qui fait qu'après, les paysans là-bas ne vivent plus, ils abandonnent leurs terres. Quand ils abandonnent leurs terres, c'est les déserts qui avancent. C'est la première source de régression des surfaces cultivables du monde, hein, l'avancée des déserts par ces abandons de culture. Et puis les gens, comme ils ne savent plus quoi faire, ils vont dans les bidonvilles, et puis dans les bidonvilles, ils ne tiennent plus, donc on les retrouve dans les migrants. Ça, c'est juste pour dire la boucle qu'on génère avec notre système. Après, il y a comment l'agriculture du monde fonctionne aujourd'hui. Juste 3 chiffres. On a 30 millions de paysans avec le tracteur et la chimie, 300 millions avec le cheval et le fumier, et 1,2 milliard à la houe. Alors, on a dit que ceux qui faisaient de l'agriculture industrielle à nourrir le monde, on voit qu'ils sont en difficulté. Moi, j'ai jamais compris comment on peut imaginer qu'avec 12% des surfaces du monde, c'est-à-dire la surface cultivable de l'Europe, on allait pouvoir nourrir le monde. C'est mécaniquement pas possible. L'autre regard, c'est de dire les 1,2 milliard qui travaillent à la houe, ils produisent en moyenne 3 quintaux hectares, équivalent quintaux hectares. Des expériences ont été faites des centaines de fois pour regarder comment on peut les accompagner pour produire un peu plus, un peu mieux. Par la gestion de la matière organique, évidemment l'agroécologie. Et on voit ce que ça donne, ça coûte rien, ça leur donne de l'autonomie, donc de la souveraineté alimentaire après pour les familles. Et, et du coup, les résultats, c'est quoi? C'est qu'avec cet accompagnement de savoir, simplement de savoir, hein, la gestion de la matière organique, c'est que du savoir, ils doublent leur production. Donc, ils passent de 3 à 6 quintaux hectares. Et bien, ces surfaces-là, aujourd'hui, passer de 3 à 6 quintaux hectares, ça ferait 3 milliards de quintaux supplémentaires, c'est plus que la faim dans le monde. Donc la solution, il faut la prendre par l'autre bout de la lorgnette et regarder les choses différemment. Et du coup, quand on dit ça, ben on voit bien qu'au niveau européen, il faut gérer les choses complètement différemment, que les politiques ne sont plus du tout les mêmes, etc. etc.
Merci. Beata? Beata, the floor is yours.
Tak, dziękuję bardzo. Ja tylko na początku powiem, że zgadzam się z tym, co
I do agree what my predecessor has answered. He mentioned the agricultural sector and the subsidies, and I do agree, but I will add the sector for the development support. And this is an instrument which is where the European Union is the biggest donor, and knowledgeable aid is a sine qua non condition of stimulation and food safety in many regions. We discuss it very often at the Commission for Development, and we think that unquestionably the control of those money, which is exemplified in the call for, well, giving people a rod, you know, to teach them how to, or to help them catch a fish, because this is where we've got the biggest problems with the food security. So the third question, cooperation, and the full cooperation and respect towards the countries that we are helping, of course, where it is possible, because where it's necessary to provide the humanitarian aid, it's very important. And there is no way of talking because of there is a military regime, because there are pathologies, or there is some difficulties. But where there is a possibility, there must be a partnership, because without the partnership, we won't be able to cooperate with the local communities that we were talking about it earlier and paying the most attention to. In this operation, we need to look out into something which is very important, the human dignity. This is important in all those operations, I think. And I will give you one example only, which is connected strictly with the food security, because this is an example of the countries that are at war, Syria or other places, or some countries that are getting out of the war, like Iraq. My experience in humanitarian aid and well, providing the food, really, which was very important in Lebanon. This is the example of today. But giving and treating people with dignity, and I will call the Yazidis. They said, do not give us money. We know how to run farms and how to provide food, because the men have been killed by the Islamic State. So going forward with their wishes, providing animals, helping them, building their farms. We help them to get out of total and utter penury and poverty. So we should really pay attention to the human dignity. And something which I'll go back to, which is the food waste. Of course, I'm trying to diagnose the problem at the moment, and there are certain estimations of various organizations. And this is a very important aspect because we can produce so much food in the world, which will allow to and will provide food security. So why are there many people who are suffering because of that? This is all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beata. Anja?
Yes, thank you, Thierry. Well, let me start by saying that to improve accountability, we need first to have clear and binding rules, including binding rules for due diligence. I think that is one of the most effective things to make people accountable and also trace where it goes wrong. A second point we can do is, for instance, to help the local communities, is to recognize ecocide as a crime. I think that is a major step to help communities to address and complain against companies, against countries, against people who really destroy complete ecosystems and areas. So ecocide is one of the major things here to help local communities, I think. There was a lot of discussion about food security and how to feed all the people in the world. And I think sometimes it's not so difficult to find solutions. With the current area of farmland and cropland, we can feed 10 billion people easily, but we have to stop feeding, using the grains we produce to feed them to animals instead of humans, and to feed them to fuel plants. If everyone in the world would move to plant-based diets, we can give a lot of farmland back to nature and help restoring biodiversity at the same time. So I just want to say, our farm and our fork and knives are mighty weapons in the fight against hunger, water shortage, soil degradation, climate change, biodiversity loss, and at the same time benefit human health and animal welfare. So let's use these weapons effectively.
Thank you so much, and I think we're just in time. I think thank you also for your contributions. And I would like to give the floor now to Eric Andrieu and Morgan Audi to make the concluding remarks. Eric Andrieu, probably you all know him. He is MEP since now 2012, so almost 10 years. He has been the chair of a special committee on pesticide after the Monsanto papers. He led the report about employment in rural areas and was involved in the review of the organic regulation. But most of all, you probably know him as one of the rapporteur of the last CAP reform, and in particular on the common market organizations. He's now full member also of the Committee of Development, and is still also active in Agri and the Envy Committee. And I will also already introduce Morgan, who is a peasant farmer in Western France. She is producing vegetables, if I'm not mistaken. and also member of the coordinating committee of ECVC, active in 22 European countries, so that's a lot. But also lastly, in January, she has taken the role of being the Morgan, I leave you the floor for your concluding remarks.
Merci Thierry. Donc,
Thank you, Thierry. Allow me to start, Morgan, and I will give you the final words. So I will have now to draw, not a conclusion, but the starting discussion. That's actually following this seminar, this webinar, which was a friendly way to exchange about essential topics. And it goes without saying that the EU has quite a responsibility to play, as it was said. First, I'd like to welcome the hardship of the NGOs who fought this fight to challenge the summit. We were several in the European Parliament to express ourselves in plenary session, saying that the world governance of food security should not be seized by multinationals, which will only defend their own profits. We should be careful, because the momentum launched by this summit is worrying, and it could be institutionalized within the FAO. So it's important to promote, to denounce this, because there is a risk that it could lead to less contribution by the CSA. And it's the only place where the peasants' organizations and the NGOs have the place that they deserve. But we should be very careful, because their position is now weaker than before. So what has happened since 2009? The food markets changed from 2013 on, and many commitments were just forgotten. That's what we realize today, and I will be quite quick. The figures are unambiguous. The second objective of the sustainable development, which is to put an end to hunger in the world, is not achievable. It's important to note that, because in the international organizations, with the complicity, the active complicity of the European Union, and I heard you say what you said earlier, that they continued to promote the neoliberal software in this discussion, software that they want to maintain in spite of all our hard work. So they want to defend the neoliberal software, saying that the hunger is an issue linked to lack of production, and with the GMOs and pesticides, we will solve this issue by countering the lack of production. But we know that is not the main issue, and the trade deficit, African trade deficit, increased, and this is not acceptable, because we know that the terms of the negotiations are not equal, and I can see that it is the case. In spite of the richness of the African continent, the responsibility of the EU, and because of the CAP, is enormous, and it has to be said. We know the challenges. The time has come to have a more coherent approach and to refuse a situation in which the problems in Africa lead to a shift of populations. If the objective is to combat hunger. We should refuse business as usual. Business as usual in the European Parliament is still the standard. And this is true, except for some countries such as China and Russia, which refuse the neoliberal standards and strengthened their farm policies to strengthen their own food security. And the issue of storage is also to be raised. But since last year, there has been a sharp increase of oil costs and energy costs, and it is quite logical. It led to tensions, for instance, in Kazakhstan. And I think that the script of the end of the year 2000 might happen again. So we should challenge the credo of the self-regulation of the markets. And the European Union has an enormous responsibility, which is to deactivate the World Trade Agreement. This is the sine qua non condition if we want to relaunch a new food international governance where the right of food security would be recognized. And of course, challenging a food governance controlled by some multinationals should also be based upon a common diagnosis that will have to be promoted wherever needed. And we have to do it now that the answer by the WTO is on the agenda. And we can further this discussion with other members of the parliament. The relevance of the own initiative is very high because we have to make proposals in such an important environment if we want to advance this issue in a collective way around the challenge of governance. It's a major objective for the near future. That's what I want to tell you as a conclusion. It's quite an important challenge. And I'm looking at Leonard. We should make sure that the European Commission forgets about this double discourse. We can't have this first, the Green Deal, which calls for a renew of the agricultural policy, and at the same time continue as if nothing happened. This is a challenge that should be common to all of us, and it obliges us to revisit the model that we have put into place for the last 30 years. And the moment has come to do that and to accept this challenge and to take the fight where it should be taken. Thank you. Morgan? Yes, I'd like to thank you all for your participation in this webinar, which was an important moment for all of us. I think so. Via Campesina gathers more than 200 million small producers, small peasants throughout the world. And I'd like to reaffirm our commitment in favor of a democratic and inclusive multilateralism. The states must decide on the basis of the principle one state equals one vote. And this is important because all the states should face their own responsibilities. And of course, the concerned people must also be consulted. In the field of agriculture and food, it goes without saying that the most concerned people are the small producers, the peasants, the fishermen, women, but also the agricultural workers, which are often migrants. It has been quite a breakthrough in the reform of the Committee on Food Security to enable the fact that an effective participation of the most affected populations was guaranteed. And the European Union should use that as a source of inspiration to improve its own governance. And last but not least, the space should also be given to the private sector, but with limitations, with boundaries in order to avoid conflicts of interest. But during the summit on the food systems, we realized that there was a reversal of the world governance of food system, and the multinationals took control of this governance. It should be said today, as small producers, we are worried because of this new development in the world food governance systems. And that's why we wanted to organize today's webinar, in order to express our concerns and to make sure that a collective reaction is possible. The Committee for Food Security should be the foundation of an inclusive food governance, world food governance. But there's an elephant in the room to be tackled today. Who decides who will control the food production, world food production? That's the WTO and the free trade agreements, meaning the multinationals, they decide, and it raises a major issue. And that's the reason why, as an organization of small peasants, we ask for a change in the software in order to put food security at the core of the world food governance. What do we mean by food security? It's the right by the state, for the states and for the populations to decide which agricultural and food policies they are going to implement. We don't want the rule and the dogma of free trade to govern our food systems, but democracy should be at the core of this system. This is a much needed change. How to move forward? How to progress at the level of the European Union? Too often, we have the feeling that the European Union defends the interests of major European companies rather than the interests of the European population or the populations of the other regions in the world. Of course, this is not acceptable, and facing this situation, what we ask as an organization of small peasants, we ask for the European Union to play its role and to reaffirm the values of democracy and human rights. To do that, the Committee on Food Security should receive the means that it needs. Very often it is said that this committee doesn't work, but we must provide it with the tools and resources they need, instead of giving other resources to undemocratic systems such as the summit. We have to give the resources where democracy really exists and inclusivity exists. And we should also work to the implementation of the human rights and the rights of peasants and people living in rural environment. We welcome the possibility that there will be an own initiative report by the European Parliament, and we think that food security should be at the core of a modern food governance if we want it to be really democratic. Thank you once again for your participation and your interest, and I hope that this is only a beginning and that we will continue to work together to promote food security and a more democratic world food governance.
Merci Eric, merci à tous les panélistes pour vos interventions très
Thank you all.
Très riches. Thank you also for the interpreters, and this is certainly a debate to be followed. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.